Alright. Alright, in this little installment of David talking about random shit, we're going to talk about Evangelion, which is probably my favorite anime that I've seen. It's a show that really resonated with me emotionally. One of the only shows to make me cry. Non Biori was another one. Assassination Classroom, the last episode did make me cry, even though it was very cloying, but it was pretty emotional. And Ava at the end, but Ava was like uncontrollable, basically. That really hit me hard. So I'll try to talk a little bit about why I think it hit me so hard. And a lot of it comes down to, first of all, the show is just incredibly well made. Just everything is just put together so well. And the other part, which is really the main thing that I think I was able to connect with, was the character writing. And, if you haven't seen Evangelion, you've probably heard that, you probably either heard that the characters are just the worst. They're just, some of the worst characters in the anime, or you've heard that, they're the best written characters. I'm definitely on the side that they're the best written characters. I don't even know how people can't see that, because they're really deep, the characters. You could really explore them. I mean, Goat Jesus has done multiple videos exploring just Shinji, I think, and he, for however many minutes just talking about Shinji. And Shinji deserves his own videos because he's extremely interesting. He's in my favorite character list for a reason, but I'll talk a little bit. I guess I'll start off with Shinji. So basically Shinji, from the way that I understand him, he's a kid that grew up without his parents, basically grew up without his dad, and he's really always kind of been on his own. So most of his interactions with people growing up has been people telling him, hey Shinji, you need to do this, you need to whatever, you need to go to school today, you have to do whatever. He never had a parent. So obviously a lot of parents speak, say these things to their kids, but the problem is he never had a parent that also fulfilled the loving side of parenting to him. He really never experienced that family love, which is very relatable. So growing up his whole life, Shinji, sorry about that, I just got a text message. Growing up his whole life, Shinji both had immediate direction from others on what to do, but also had no overarching direction on what it means to be a good person, if that makes sense, and what it means to be productive and be good, good to people and fit in, I guess, really. So immediately where the show picks up is, Shinji's however old he is. I think he's 14. He's basically lost. He is just following this directive. He gets a note, I think, from his father, a very straightforward note, to basically go to Nerve. And Misato comes to pick him up. And immediately he's thrown off by Misato, because Misato is someone who, in her exterior at least, immediately shows a warmth to Shinji that he's never felt before, I think. So he already doesn't exactly know how to react to Misato, because Misato is really just she's both a breath of fresh air and she's kind of like a bomb in his face. So there's kind of an immediate tension between them, but as the show goes on, he comes to understand her and her way of living. But so in that first episode, Shinji basically, I mean, you can tell that he's already dealing with some kind of depression because, I mean, you can see it on his face. You know, he's constantly has a slight frown. He has little emotion. His eyebrows stay extremely steady. They don't really express much, which is how most anime characters kind of express emotion. It's through a lot of it's through their eyebrows, but he doesn't have that. So by the end of the second episode, he basically has to go into battle against one of the angels, and through the power of basically the Eva unit taking over, he's able to defeat the angel. And once he realizes that that's kind of what he's gonna be doing, and that he's not gonna really experience much in the way of praise from people. If anything, Toji, his later friend from high school, you know, he attacked Shinji because his little sister, I believe, got hurt when Shinji was trying to protect the city. So he attacks him. And so basically Shinji's already associating in his head, even if I perform well in this, even if I'm doing exactly like I'm told, like I've always done, that's not going to cut it anymore. So I think that kind of facilitates his little, kind of falls down a depressive road for an episode or two, where he really, I mean, okay, so you can see him repeating the same song over and over on his little iPod kind of thing, his little Walkman sort of deal, tape player, whatever. Everyone understands what that's supposed to mean. You know, he's trying to find comfort in this one thing that he loves, which is this one song. But really, that whole episode where he's depressed, he's really just going everywhere and he's looking everywhere, but all he's seeing is what other people would find beauty in and would find passion and love in, and he just sees nothing because he's never understood what is beautiful about himself or about other people or about the world, really. He's really just grown up in this kind of weird status quo state where he just doesn't understand human interaction and what makes us us, as I stated before. So that kind of all culminates in the end where he basically says that he's useless. He's not, he has no courage, he's spineless, you know, and that kind of goes back to that one quote from Hideaki Anno where he's basically saying, you know, he doesn't really like himself very much. And I think that obviously a lot of Shinji's character comes from Hideaki Anno and just his experience with depression and trying to come to terms with that. So basically, as the show goes on, more characters are introduced, but our constant's Shinji. And Shinji kind of has this weird oscillating character arc where he kind of he goes down into depression, you know, he hits his low, and then he comes back up. Particularly in the episode where he saves Rei from when she was stuck inside the Eva unit. Because that really gave him a feeling of, I actually did something good, and I got, you know, a show of gratitude in response from Rei, because she smiled, which is something that Rei, of course, never does. So then he kind of hits a high there, and he kind of continues that high as Asuka comes into the show. Although it's a little bit of a different high, but it kind of almost becomes like a typical school show for a little bit with mecha fights involved when Asuka comes on, because she kind of forces the show to just... I think Digi did a video on it. Asuka changes everything. She really just makes the show into like a different show. I mean, it's completely true. She makes everything way more lighthearted, but of course that's subverted hugely later on with her character arc, but we'll talk about that. So Shinji hits that high. He gets on that high. And later on, as he keeps on fighting the angels, and as things kind of start to go a little more downhill, when Kaoru comes on, especially, that's like the real low, is when he's forced to kill Kaoru. But there's kind of this slow, steady descent that's present in Shinji's character arc, where he keeps on fighting his angels, and it just really feels like there's no end to it, I think, for him. He just doesn't really know, like, he doesn't really have an end goal. Like, he's still never really given that, which is the one thing that he was always looking for. So he really just needs this end goal in order to understand himself and to not be depressed, basically. But he can't find that because he's clogging up his life with these short-term little successes, which he isn't even congratulated for most of the time. His dad still doesn't give a fuck about him, you know? He's a real bitch. I fucking hate Shinji's dad. But anyways, so Kaoru comes along around episode 20, I think, somewhere around that. And he finally instills a sense of belonging and happiness in Shinji, because Shinji's finally found someone who seems to really appreciate him for who he is and shows him love in an unrequited way. He doesn't have to impress upon Kaoru in any way. Kaoru just sees Shinji and recognizes him as a person, basically, and says, I love you because you are a person, and that in itself is beautiful. And then, of course, we find out Kaoru is an angel, and Shinji kills him. And that's kind of the last straw for Shinji's character. It's because he finally found this person who accepted him, and now that person's immediately gone at his own hands. So that really sets off, you know, the avalanche of emotion and you know, low budget animation and whatnot that kind of fuels the feelings of the last few episodes. As everything kind of falls apart, both within the show and within, you know, the meta context of what's going on with the studio. But in the last 2 episodes, there is a sort of realization that has come to. It's not entirely happy, but there is a resolution, and it is given for Shinji. Shinji kind of finds his ultimate meaning, in a sense. Even if it's a misguided one, it is an ultimate meaning that he finds. So the show kind of always has this theme throughout it of different, I don't know how to describe them. I'll call them like existences. I guess that makes sense. These different existences that exist within the minds of everyone, and these existences are basically what people's perspectives of the people around them are. So for Shinji, he has his own existence, which is him controlling himself, but he also is kind of dealing with and struggling with the existence of himself within the minds of everyone else. And all the characters deal with this. And it really is like the glue that holds the show together in its later half is this concept. It's introduced like episode 16, I think. So basically, the whole show is Shinji is trying to break away from these existences that are in other people's minds of himself. He's struggling to find himself in this world that won't love him, and this world that has this misconception of who he is, and it's really informing his own misconception of himself, which causes his depression. But in the last episode, he kind of realizes that in order to kind of deal with all of these existences, he needs to just love his own self. He needs to come to terms with his own life. Because in doing so, that kind of sets off a domino effect where he loves himself, which allows him to love other people, which affects the existences of the other people within his own mind, right? Which causes other people who are also dealing with this to sort of break free of the chains of these other people's conceptions of them. So he realizes that life starts at loving yourself. When you love yourself, if everyone loves themselves, especially, the world kind of naturally falls into a positive order. And everything sort of falls in place, you know? Which was a message that when I heard it in the show, that is basically what caused me to start bawling, basically. It just really hit me. It was like, it's kind of true. It's not entirely, it's not foolproof, that ideal, and the show kind of accepts that. It kind of hints at that, but as a final message, it hits home. It's something that really fits in with the themes of the show, because it's really just characters struggling with their own demons, and just this idea that loving yourself, that's all you have to do. It almost feels like a cop-out, but it also really just kind of, it does make sense, and it wraps up the show in a pretty amazing way, I think. But I'll go and I'll talk about the other characters. So Asuka, I'll talk about Asuka next. So Asuka comes on the scene episode 8 or so, and she's immediately pretty wild, and all the guys are really into her, especially in the manga. They really go into this, that like the guys are just obsessed with her. They think she's so cute, and she really just, and they also in the manga, they really portray her more as like a goody two shoes, like on the outside, who's just kind of an asshole on the inside, whereas in the anime they kind of more portray her as just straight up an asshole most of the time. So the anime actually think does a better job with her character, because that makes more sense, is that she's really just an asshole. Like, she's really abrasive, but at the same time, that abrasion comes from the fact that she can't come to terms with her own self, which is the same thing with Shinji. It's a theme from all the characters. So that they don't really understand themselves, so they can't love themselves. But her problems come from, so basically with Asuka, there's two existences, that she's dealing with. The first existence is her own. It's her own self-image, which is she's extremely smart. She's extremely well-rounded, basically. So she's always had this idea of herself as being like at the top. Like, she's really, like, she's independent. She's strong. She's very talented in all these ways, you know. So she has a very high base self-image of herself, I think. However, the other existence that she's dealing with is that of her mother. So basically, her mother, if I'm remembering correctly, I saw this show like a year ago. She kind of just like loses her morals, I think. And her mother starts clinging to a doll of Asuka. And she basically thinks that the doll is Asuka herself. So, and this, goes on for whatever years of her life. So Asuka begins to associate herself with this doll. She begins to see herself as this doll, as this thing that is just inanimate. It doesn't have any sort of superiority to it. It's just a doll that you hold in your hand, that her mother holds in her hand. Yet her mother seems to think that this doll is Asuka. So in Asuka's head, she has her own high self-image is competing with this incredibly low self-image, basically, that her mother has of her, which is that, for all intents and purposes, she doesn't exist. And, that this doll, which is nothing, is her image of Asuka. So these competing existences kind of cause Asuka's bad behaviors to sort of be amplified, I think. Where she becomes really, really full of herself and really obnoxious because she kind of needs to convince herself that she is not just a doll, that she is a person. Once again, like with Shinji, she needs to come to terms with herself as a human being, and she needs to understand that she's a human being, but she's struggling with that because she lacks that understanding, at least from her mother. So Asuka she's basically overcompensating for herself. And that's really heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking stuff. And she doesn't really get a great resolution, I think. She kind of just dies defending the world in one kind of last outrage, and one last burst of energy. She kind of just fucks up a lot of the angels, which I guess kind of speaks to the fact that she's overcompensating, but it doesn't feel like she really was able to come to terms. Like, it kind of felt more for Shinji that he was able to. But the last character, the last Eva pilot that's worth talking about is Rei. Rei is definitely the hardest character for me to understand, I would say, out of all the characters in Eva. She is the lifeless doll, as everyone knows, but at the same time, she shows these little bursts of emotion. And it kind of is almost like a puzzle trying to figure out why in these certain moments she shows this emotion, if that makes sense, based on her background. So Rei, once again, she's definitely the most intriguing character in some ways, I would say, because you really have to piece her together, I think. But so going back to the theme of these existences and these images of people that exist within both our own minds, other people's minds. Rei is competing with by far the most existences out of anyone. Rei has countless inner existences that she has to deal with because of her existence as a clone, basically, right? So she kind of is dealing with all of these, once again, countless just clones that are kind of within her own mind, right? And that war that she has to fight causes her to go within herself because she can't even deal with people in the outside world. She can't deal with the existence of herself within other people's mind because she already is dealing with so much in her own mind. I think that's why she, in her exterior, portrays herself as this lifeless doll, because if it it doesn't allow people to have a strong image of what she is or to have any kind of differing perspective on her, because she really is just nothing. She's really nothing in her exterior. But the moments where she shows emotion are very interesting. She smiles when Shinji saves her from the Eva in episode, I think, 6 or so. Mostly because she's thinking about his father, who she has this innate understanding of and this innate love for, which comes from the fact that she's a clone of Shinji's mother, which is just one of the voices, these existences in her own head that's kind of competing for her own attention. One of them is of Shinji's mother. So she has this defensive attitude towards Shinji's father. It's why she slaps Shinji in like episode 4 or 5, or maybe even earlier, because he kind of bad talks his dad. But besides those, there's not many other moments where she shows strong emotion, because she's just dealing with these existences in her own head. She has to fight, constantly. Anyways, the last character that's particularly important is Misato. Misato is someone who's dealt with a lot. She lost her father. I think he was trying to save her, if I remember right. And throughout her life, she's sort of similar to Asuka. She's kind of put on a mask her whole life because she's always found it very hard to connect with people outside of a surface level, excitable interaction like she has with Shinji, for instance. All of her interactions with people are based on the fact that she is Genki. She's excitable. That is what her entire life is, basically. And that's why she's always had so much trouble connecting with, oh my god, Ponytail. Kaji, Jesus Christ, fucking Kaji. Alright. Anyways, that's why she has had trouble allowing Kaji into her life, because she doesn't really think of herself as someone who's able to connect with people on an intimate level. She keeps everything, at her fingertips. She keeps everything at a distance, She never lets people in. Kaji kind of forces himself into her life, and that's why at first she's very hesitant and she's kind of abrasive towards Kaji, because she doesn't want to be hurt, and she doesn't want to accept the fact that she needs to change, and that she needs to better understand herself like all the other characters. So a lot of her character arc, she hates the acclaim and the recognition that she receives from other people, because generally people love her. All the guys at Shinji's school love her. Everyone praises her at her job generally. Like, occasionally she'll mess up a little bit, but she always is praised. But she finds all of that pointless because she knows that the person she's being praised as is not who she actually is. She's being praised for what she's portraying outside of herself, when she knows that on the inside she's a broken person, and that she's not even broken. She was just never put together in the first place because she didn't have that experience growing up. Once again, since her dad died, she didn't really have this understanding of love and of intimacy and what it means to be human. So at one point she said, later in the show, she says that the real her just cries all the time. That the person that is given acclaim is not her. Which really kind of that's another thing that's really just hits hard. It's really heartbreaking because this character, she does everything that she does because she wants the people around her to be happy. And she wants to be uplifting, but she never really understood how to uplift herself. So all the time, on the inside, she's just crying because she doesn't understand true happiness. But her exterior is her way of compensating for that. So she always acts like she's happy. There's a thing that my mom used to say where basically the people who seem like they have it together the most are usually the ones who have it together the least. And that definitely is reflected in Misato, because she is, in many ways, less mature than even Shinji or Asuka, or definitely Rei. Because she just doesn't have any understanding of what it truly means to interact with people and to have those real connections. That's really the point of the show, is trying to explore these people who are all putting on masks. They all have this facade that they kind of fall back on every time that they're interacting with people. These people that don't understand how to connect with people because they've never experienced it. They've never understood what it means to be a person. And that's what's beautiful about Evangelion, because I think that everyone can relate to that idea. That we are all just kind of actors in our own little worlds, and we're all just trying to portray ourselves in the way that most effectively avoids conflict, avoids both inner conflict, external conflict, in the ways that just allow us to live our lives comfortably. But sometimes it requires, many ways, it requires being uncomfortable, because that's how we understand our world better. You have to, leave your comfort zone. That's very relatable for me. Growing up, I've always kind of, not necessarily put on an act, I guess, but I have never understood myself super well, I don't think. I really still don't understand myself. But I've always kind of portrayed myself as someone who did understand myself, because that's my way of compensating, is that I need to act like I have it together, even though I have nothing together, And I think that a lot of people feel that. And that's why so many people connect with the show.